Hello, Strong Knotz here from the Video Psychosis podcast. We're doing something a little bit different with this video. Generally, I like to talk about whatever obscure movie I've been watching, give you a quick review on it. But we're here to let you know we don't just watch movies here at Video Psychosis. We also collect records. So I'm going to take you through some of my collection and show you some of my favorite movie soundtracks that I own on LP. So, we start off with this little bad boy. The Oh Lucky Man soundtrack by Alan Price. My favorite Lindsay Anderson movie. Beautiful soundtrack, side A. I'm a big fan of. There's our boy there. Probably a favorite song on this might be Sell Sell, but the whole thing is fantastic. Seen that movie a few times. That whole trilogy I think is really good. Britannia Hospital is particularly undervalued and I think kind of misunderstood. So that's a great one. Next up, from the 2010s, Entertainment by Rick Alverson. I'm a big fan of this movie. Big fan of this guy. Why? And there's some really great stuff on here. It's kind of funny bringing this up after Oh Lucky Man because there's a song on here, It Makes You Feel So Bad. Let's see, who does that song? Yeah, Inside Out. And just like Oh Lucky Man, that song was on Eastbound and Down, one of my favorite TV shows. So the Entertainment soundtrack, great stuff. Also, collection of Erotic Vibrations and Bossa Moods. This is like a compilation album, just various different really cool Italian songs from various movies. One thing I like about this record, and you won't be able to see what I mean, but if you were to feel the sleeve, it's really soft. You know, it's really soft and kind of leaves a residual feeling on the fingers after you touch it. Sort of like a beautiful woman, no? You know what I'm saying? One of my favorite songs on here is, I believe it's Piero Umiliani, the $5 for an August Moon song, or $5 for an August Moon. Yeah, great stuff. So next up, more Italian stuff, and that's going to be the Dawn of the Dead soundtrack by Goblin, and another soundtrack by Goblin, Suspiria. And both of these I got from Rainy Day Records here in Olympia, Washington. Big fan of Goblin. Big fan of horror movies. Both of those are great. What else do we have here? Well, a movie that I'm a big fan of and one that finally, after years and years of waiting and not being able to see it in the correct aspect ratio and playing a game, having seen the film more than 10 times where I count the boom mics, it's Get Crazy. Alan Arkish. Huge fan of this movie. I own it on Blu-ray, I own it on VHS, and I own it on Betamax. And I have the soundtrack. Fantastic stuff. My favorite song on there is probably the Leaving Fear cover of Hoochie Coochie Man. Great stuff. Everybody knows I'm here. Speaking of fantastic, Performance. The Performance soundtrack. You'll be a funny looking geezer when you're 50. And he is indeed. Great movie. James Fox. I heard a story about this guy. Supposedly he did this movie and it was too much for him, and I think he actually ate mushrooms on the set and ended up running off to a monastery after they filmed this movie. Either way, fantastic stuff. You got The Last Poets on there. My favorite song, probably everybody's favorite song from the soundtrack, Memo from Turner, where it has that music video scene in the movie. Great stuff. Another one, Phantom of the Paradise, Brian De Palma. My favorite song on here by far, For the Hell of It. Paul Williams, that's the hell of it, dude. Just that song I could listen to on loop over and over and over again. And I actually found this for a quarter. Don't be fooled by this $2 tag. I actually paid I think 50 cents or $1 for this because it was in a used bin full of moldy records at this flea market type place not too far from where I live. So, next up, Stop Making Sense, Talking Heads. Big fan of Jonathan Demme, who doesn't like a big suit. And I'm not as crazy about some of these live versions as the album versions, but you can't go wrong with this album because the liner notes have all these weird questions. So, Jonathan Demme, Talking Heads, always good. Here's one I inherited from the family. John Williams, the Star Wars soundtrack. And yes, this is an original pressing from the 70s. I don't listen to it very often, because I'm not a fucking nerd. No, I'm just kidding. Like what you like, it's a free country. Good stuff, though. I do like the first 3 Star Wars movies. And when I say the first 3 Star Wars movies, I mean the real first 3 movies. Episodes 4 through 6. So, some boomer music coming up here. Boom, it's the American Graffiti soundtrack. Double album. Funny story, when I was in elementary school, we used to have the soundtrack for this movie on tape. And I actually brought a Walkman to school and got in trouble because while I was doing work, I was listening to the soundtrack on the Walkman on headphones in class. And they were like, you can't listen to music in class. And I was like, don't tell me what to do. I listen to Del Shannon. Great stuff. Boomer music. But there's nothing wrong with that. So this next album, not really a music album. It's literally just W.C. Fields' comedy routines. You know? It's literally just quotes of him from movies. And I'm a big fan of W.C. Fields. Giant drunk, hates kids. Very relatable. Goggle bean sounds like a bubble in a bathtub. The Shaft soundtrack. This is actually the second copy of this that I've owned throughout my lifetime. You know, the movie itself, I've only seen once. Not one of my favorite blaxploitation films. Though it's a pretty decent movie. But you can't go wrong with the soundtrack. I'm pretty sure he won an Academy Award for this, didn't he? Isaac Hayes? Either way, Hot Buttered Soul, one of the best albums ever. Big fan of that. And speaking of things I'm a big fan of, Paul Schrader, American Gigolo. Love this movie, one of my favorite films of his. Giorgio Moroder soundtrack. You got Blondie on there. Can't go wrong with that. Undervalued movie, still not quite appreciated like it should be. And don't worry, I don't ironically appreciate it in that Aaron Eckhart, Neil LaBute way. I promise you, I just really like the movie. I'm not a bad person, I promise. And as you might know from this little poster right here, I'm a big fan of this. I own like 13 copies of this movie. But that's all I'll say about that. If you know me, you know. Next up, Michel Legrand. French movie stuff. The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. I'm not as big a fan of that as like his score for Breathless. But it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Now, a movie that I saw on 35mm for my birthday several years ago at the Midtown Art in Atlanta, Robert Altman's Nashville. Huge fan of Altman. Admittedly, not one of my favorite films of his. I prefer The Long Goodbye, California Split, even Shortcuts. But Nashville is a fantastic film and pretty much the essential distillation of what makes an Altman film an Altman film. It's no McCabe and Mrs. Miller. But you know what else is no McCabe and Mrs. Miller? A little porno from the 1970s called Deep Throat. And this is great because you can listen to this record without feeling really sleazy. You know, you watch that movie, there are those stories about how supposedly Linda Lovelace was forced to perform the sex in that movie at gunpoint. Yikes. But you don't have to worry about that when you listen to this soundtrack. Linda rides the bus, dude. Or Linda drives the car. The theme song from that movie, fantastic. When they reissued the movie on VHS later, they kind of changed the music. Not as good. Gotta love that original soundtrack. Deep Throat. Tourist Trap. This is good stuff. Pino Donaggio. I'm a big fan of him. Did a lot of Brian De Palma scores, and this one's fantastic. Very underrated movie, underrated soundtrack. Great stuff. And speaking of spooky movies, woo, spooky! This is another one I inherited from my family. The Omen. Jerry Goldsmith. Love his score for Chinatown. And this one's pretty good. I like to put this on when I'm about to sacrifice babies for the Dark Lord, you know? That's always good. Get a little circle going. Some goat's blood. Billy Friedkin. Still cracking them out. Wang Chung, you know? I don't listen to this one too much, admittedly, but I do love the title track. That's pretty solid. You gotta dig that. This one was a birthday present for my old lady. And I was lucky to see this movie in 2K when Janus Films re-released it for their Criterion collection. If you know, you know. Shouts out to Sweet Leaf Segundo, who I saw this picture with theatrically. Great film, I've long been a fan of it. Speaking of films I've long been a fan of, and more boomer music, boom, Easy Rider. I'm not gonna lie to you, you know what my favorite song on here is? Don't Bogart That Joint. My friend, pass it over to me. Say no more, fam. Hey, great soundtrack, great movie. Can't go wrong with this one. Bam. Repo Man. Got this at Rainy Day Records. Extremely cheap. What is there to say about Repo Man in 2022? Incredible movie. Who doesn't like Repo Man? It's one of those movies that I sort of saw many times, and even though I didn't understand it the first few times, I kept coming back to it, and I still love it. It's fantastic. I don't know if I understand it any better now, but I think maybe I do. So Stelvio Cipriani, I'm a big fan of. The Perfect Killer. I actually haven't seen this movie. I should, because Lee Van Cleef is the fucking man. I'm a big fan of him. There's some really gnarly violence on the back. Look at that. What's going on there? Yikes. But Stelvio Cipriani, the Tentacle soundtrack, one of my favorites, personally. I think some of the finest Italian film music. And even though it has a few recycled songs from other films. And you know what's a really underrated soundtrack? When people talk about this movie, they always say, the music doesn't fit. The music doesn't fit this movie. This movie's so disturbing. The music doesn't work, but you know what? Fuck what you heard. The music is fantastic. I love this soundtrack. I actually listen to this one quite a lot. And I can't be alone, because that goofball Tarantino stole Now You're All Alone for The Hateful Eight. That's how good it is. But enough about that goofball. Let's talk about someone who actually matters. You remember this guy? He said Tarantino reheated old dishes? Fucking burnt. Big fan of this guy, just passed away a couple of years ago. Il Maestro. You can't beat this guy. The best. The absolute best. And this is a compilation I could listen to all day long. Absolutely fantastic. Now, what would the man in me say about this next one? Well, I don't know, but they would do nearly any task to talk about it. Great soundtrack. Got Captain Beefheart, Les Baxter, you know, Nina Simone. I really like the Gypsy Kings cover of the Eagles, because the Eagles stink. But that cover is muy bueno. Very good. How about a newer film here? Oh my goodness. Funny story about this movie, actually. I went and saw this in the theater twice. 2 times. And the second time I saw it was with a friend of mine and my girlfriend. And my friend was not feeling the movie. And he went and sat in the lobby for like the last hour of the movie. And when I asked him why, he tried to like play it off, and he said that he thought I was like getting a hand job or something. And I'm like, if you don't like the movie, just say you don't like the movie, dude. You don't have to sit there and be like, oh, I thought you were getting a hand job. I was really uncomfortable, because you could have just went and sat in another seat. But whatever. Great movie. Great soundtrack. And for the last thing we're going to dive into here. Boom. Fulci. This is the soundtrack for the Gates of Hell trilogy. And this thing is a beast. It's enormous. Look at that. You've got the soundtrack for City of the Living Dead, The Beyond, and The House by the Cemetery. And the only thing that could make this soundtrack better would be if they just had a sample of Bob talking on it from House by the Cemetery, because everybody loves that kid, right? So, there you go. These are some of my favorite LP soundtracks that I own. I'm Strong Knotz. This is Video Psychosis. Thanks for watching.